A recent letter to the editor of our Springfield newspaper publicly informed me that a group of Christians had gotten together and they reported to unanimously vote me out of Christianity. Though they applauded my advocacy and service to the poor, they unanimously affirmed that my beliefs were woefully inadequate to qualify me for the title of Christian. I was rather more disturbed to see a few days later that the director of the local Southern Baptist Association of Churches also published an essay saying that though he appreciates what I do, that I really should stop claiming to be a Christian because I have rejected the kinds of beliefs that were, in my opinion, imposed on the Christian church in the 3rd century by Emperor Constantine, and he did that in order to make Christians compliant with his military agenda and to make the church morally irrelevant. Though I believe that it was both unprofessional and rather embarrassingly simple-minded of him to publish those dismissive insults, to me by name, but by inference to all of you as well, I have to say that honestly I'm not too surprised. Frankly, if their religion of beliefs in incarnation and intercession, of souls bound for either heaven or hell, or magical books written by God, invisible angels or demons, if that is Christianity, then I'm not one. Though I think Christianity is actually something quite different and a lot better than that. Most of us were reared to control our appetites, to moderate our behavior, under the simultaneous threat of the potential of being punished in hell or rewarded by eternity in heaven. In fact, we were so well trained to at least hedge our bets. I don't know if anybody really believes it whole hog, but we were hedging our bets in case these invisible claims were true, that we could hardly imagine religion existing without those things. When we first began to be exposed to the idea that religion is more a way of living than it is a set of supernatural beliefs, you can nod in agreement to that, but how many times did you hear it and still go right back to participating in the comfortable familiarity of rituals and terribly antiquated beliefs? The dawning awareness in the progressive movement is that religious practices are much more important than religious beliefs. For some reason, we've always been able to see that that was true for other people's religions. American Christians adored Gandhi for what he did. Currently, American Christians nearly idolize the Dalai Lama for his teachings on spiritual practices. Though most could not reasonably tell you 3 things that Gandhi believed about his religion or that the Dalai Lama teaches in his religion. We know about what they represent, what they do, but we never really talk about their beliefs because their beliefs don't matter. Our beliefs, however, seem to become of paramount importance. If I may be allowed to make a somewhat racial observation, white Christians have always accepted the civil rights speeches and marches for social reform that were led by black Christians, when they would never accept the same thing from their Presbyterian or Episcopal pastor. Somehow, we inherently recognize the value of the spiritual life led by outstanding Buddhists, outstanding Hindus, and outstanding black Christians, while insisting that white Christianity remain morally irrelevant and focused on magical rituals and privately held beliefs. Mainline Christians who insist that religion should not be involved in politics would never have applied that to Martin Luther King. They would have never said that to Gandhi leading the Salt March. They would never say that to the Dalai Lama, who continues to protest China's occupation of Thailand. We understand their religion is about ethics, while we insist that Christianity is about an afterlife and a kind of magical approach to living. A few years ago, I was in the uncomfortable position of pushing for an investigation of some very shady business practices at a local hospital. It seemed inevitable that a couple of my church members of the church where I was pastor at the time were going to be going to prison for a very long time. One of these pillars of the church, who had been using his board position at the hospital to scam his way into millions of dollars of income, cornered me in my office one night when I was alone to threaten me. He wasn't threatening to fight me. I was bigger than him. He was threatening to fire me, which, I'd rather fight than lose my income. The conversation became very heated, and he shouted at me, "Do you know what your problem is? You think you're Jesus Christ." And without thinking, in fact, I was rather surprised to hear the words coming out of my mouth, I jumped up and shouted, "No, I don't. I think I'm Martin Luther King." Now, I relate that story by way of saying that I don't think that any of my newspaper critics, or our newspaper critics by inference, would be quite so exercised about what I say if I were a Buddhist, or if I were Hindu, or, in fact, if I was a black pastor leading a largely black congregation in agitating for civil rights. So in some ways, I think it would be more accurate if, rather than voting me out of Christianity, if they would just vote me out of the white race. I mean, that you have to admit, I've never really fit in. You haven't either, Sean. Don't laugh at me. But not to leave you hanging on that story, my former church member did not go to prison. There was a federal investigation, and it ended up with the hospital being fined several $million, but no one was criminally charged. So, board members got to steal millions of dollars that they kept. They stole millions of dollars that came out of the pockets of sick people who had to pay exorbitant fees for services. Then the hospital had to pay millions of dollars in fines. Where did that money come from? From the pockets of sick people who were charged exorbitant medical fees. So admittedly, the public would have been hurt less if people like me had just looked the other way. Because in the end, they were initially victimized by the crimes of the hospital, and then they had to pay the fine for the crimes that other people committed. And that, men and women, is what we call white privilege in the American economic and judicial system. Progressive people of faith have had to make a conscious decision to give up the confidence that evangelicals and fundamentalists have in their religious beliefs. And many of them would look at us and ask, why do you bother? If you're not afraid of going to hell, if you don't believe there's a heaven, why do you bother? And in fact, most people among the Church Alumni Association, the people that have given up on religion, also look at us and say, why bother? Why do you bother with any of it? But ironically, none of those people would ever say that to Martin Luther King. They would have never said that to Mahatma Gandhi. They certainly don't say it to the Dalai Lama. It makes sense that Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Dalai Lama bother with their religion, whether they believe in heaven and hell or not. I'm suggesting to you that our progressive spirituality also makes a difference for exactly the same reasons. It is worth it to bother, even if we are a mostly white congregation and most of us have traditional Christian roots. With or without a heaven or hell, we know for a fact that we live in a world that is full of light and darkness. We know for a fact that there is good and evil. We know for a fact that there is tremendous wealth in the presence of violent poverty. We know that we live in a world that contrasts obesity and hunger, comfort and pain. And once you strip the magic and superstition away from religion and take a clear, sober, and rational look at reality, you face some serious choices. The world is full of things that can make you really mad, and I'm starting to doubt how much time that I expose myself to liberal media I watch MSNBC every morning and every night, and I allow myself to just get saturated in this endless supply of genuinely evil, violent, greedy, stupid, and unjust things that go on in the world. Just like this investigation that I mentioned. The facts were clear, the evidence was there, and none of the criminals were ever made to even give back the money they had stolen. I know that I need to be informed, but sometimes I find myself becoming so angry, so full of rage, that I start to see the world in very negative terms. And I know some of you get there too. The problem seems so big that we can become paralyzed with cynicism. Nothing makes sense. There's nothing you can do about it. And nihilism starts to become very attractive, to just quit caring. And this is also true on a personal level. I mean, you look at the world writ large, you look at what's being reported in television news, but you think about your personal life. I have to tell you that for most of us who live in the relative comfort of middle-class America, the personal stuff is more existentially powerful than the larger social issues. On the personal level, we've all had family members or friends who have really hurt us, and not by accident. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't just a matter of circumstances where it just happened that way. Most of us have had a lot more than one person that we loved, trusted, sacrificed for, really believed that we would be close to like brothers and sisters for our entire lives, and they have done something to hurt us that just didn't make any sense. They didn't get any money out of it. They didn't get a job promotion. They didn't get anything out of the bargain. They just intentionally, maliciously, viciously hurt you. People can be like that. Now, there may be some very complex psychological explanations for it. Some people are sociopaths. Some people do have borderline personality disorders. Some people just by parentage, adult children of alcoholics have all these kind of power games that they just play instinctively. Or it may be some very, very simple and primal human emotion. Jealousy, envy, the addictive attraction of gossip, a desire to feel powerful or important, if only for a moment. You remove spirituality from the equation of human relationships, remove the sense that we are connected to each and every other person, every other part of the universe, and you indulge yourself in the cold, hard belief that all that matters is your own experience, your own personal comfort, your feelings, your appetites, and you can talk yourself into becoming a moral monster in search of revenge. Or more likely, you can just pull it all inside. I mean, I've joked and said the reason I don't own a gun is because I know so many people who deserve to be shot. But, you know, all of these Law and Order and CSI and all these investigative shows on TV have convinced me that revenge is not that easy. They always catch you. So you don't get to take revenge, but we do bottle it all up. We just suck it all in. We store all that resentment away, that anger, that hurt, and then you wake up in the middle of the night and you stare at the ceiling just dwelling on that hurt, reliving it, feeding the fire of your anger, investing energy and time and emotion in preserving the memory of that hurt. Now, I'm not projecting here. I'm not speculating. I'm speaking existentially. I've done all of this. I have spent my adult life publicly fighting for social justice. But on the personal level, I've had to survive some very deep personal disappointments that have given me a storehouse of resentment that has kept me awake more nights than I care to think about. I have felt deep personal loss, depression, anger, so much so that I've obviously tried to dull that with food. I have felt adrenaline pumping through my body, demanding some kind of vengeful justice to set the scales right. and it oftentimes then just becomes a cheeseburger and fries. I can identify with Clarence Darrow. A lot of people say this was Mark Twain, but it was Clarence Darrow who said, "I've never killed anyone, but I have read some obituary notices with deep personal satisfaction." I'm sure that he meant that with a degree of jest, but I have opened the obituary page in the paper more than a few times and seen the faces of people who have really done me wrong. And I can tell you that while there is some relief in outliving your enemies, it's not the satisfaction you really hope for. It doesn't really scratch that itch. The most satisfying resolution to resentment and anger and hurt is reconciliation. That's the most satisfying. The best answer to anger is to forgive. The only real resolution of resentment is to lay the burden down. It would be so much easier if the people involved would apologize. I believe I could forgive anyone. But the truth is that in most cases, they will carry the conviction to their graves that they didn't do anything wrong. They don't want your forgiveness. But from a spiritual perspective, you need to forgive them anyway. You know that's what Gandhi would have done. You know that is what the Dalai Lama would tell you to do. You have read this in Thich Nhat Hanh's work. And even though the church has often overlooked it, Jesus said it too. He said the same things. Jesus tells us to go and be reconciled to the person with whom you are in conflict before you even kneel down to pray. If you're on your way to the temple to make a sacrifice and you remember that there is someone you're in conflict with, stop, turn around, and go be reconciled before you even try to enter conversation with God. And as much as I believe in reconciliation, long for it, hope for it, what I know, what you know, is that in the cases where it matters the most, it's not going to happen. The only meaningful answer is for you to choose on your side of the equation to let it go, to be the first to forgive. No matter what they do, no matter how wrong they may have been, on your side of the fence, you make the decision to forgive, to let go of the resentment, and you decide that you're going to be a better person. You have my permission to quote this sermon back to me whenever you see me screwing up. Because I guarantee you there is not a breathing person in this room that needs to hear this message more than I do. We have chosen to be a prophetic church. We practice both direct aid to those in need, and we try to challenge the institutions that create poverty, injustice, warfare, and pollution. What I'm saying is that a prophetic church cannot be successful if it is motivated by anger. If we are not motivated by love, then we really are just a political organization with a social agenda. What separates us from being just a bunch of opinionated atheists is that we have chosen a spiritual path, and that path seeks to heal the world through both justice and mercy. And I am certain that the first step of that path, the necessary and first step, is tremendously generous forgiveness. There is no other way. Amen.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.